And you've joined us on Likeable Science. I'm your host, Ethan Allen, here at the ThinkTech Studios in Pioneer Plaza. And with me today is ThinkTech's own Jay Fidell. Welcome, Jay.
Hi, Ethan. Thank you for having me today.
Always fun to talk with Jay. So Likeable Science is all about why we should all appreciate science and enjoy science. We should not be intimidated or scared by science. We should revel in it. And today we're going to focus, sort of carry on a conversation that Jay and I have been having for the last couple weeks now in different contexts about not just science, but so-called STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And STEM is a very popular term these days for that combination of these four fields that are indeed tightly interlinked. And we first had our guests, John Rand from UH STEM Initiative and Kevin Kelly from EPSCoR on, and they were talking about STEM, particularly at UH and UH system, and then you and I carried that conversation a little deeper. What I wanted to do today was take this down a really sort of concrete level and provide a little illustration of what STEM is all about.
First, I have a question.
Sure.
You know, we had a show a year ago or so with a woman named Fumiko Wellington. Fumiko Wellington is a member of the orchestra. Okay. She was raised here. And she talked about life in the old days, you know, in the 50s, about, you know, studying music, because she's a member of the orchestra. Her father was a member of the orchestra. They're really into music. And she pointed out that in the 50s, there were music classes in every school in Hawaii. Mm-hmm. There was an orchestra in every school. Everybody played, you know, and there was all this kind of kapila going on. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Hawaii was a musical place, more than most places in the world. It was a musical, everybody loved and participated in the music.
Sure.
Okay. And there were classes. The school had it in the curriculum. Mm-hmm. Okay, my point to you is that, you know, everybody is talking, all fascinated with STEM now. I agree with you, everybody talking about it. I mean, it's a household word already. STEM, big deal, STEM. What, did it just happen? Did this just get invented? Wasn't it being taught before when you went to school? Wasn't there STEM in your school? There was STEM in my school. So how come only now, Ethan? What do you think?
Well, in part, I think it's a sort of a reaction as the pendulum, you know, swings in academia back and forth. And as science has grown and split into subfields, and those subfields have split into more subfields, everyone's gotten more and more specialized on narrower and narrower tracks. You see a whole lot of research that's incredibly tightly focused now. That, while it has value to learn about more things in considerable depth, they tend to lose track of and lose connection with the real world and the rest of science and the world beyond scientists. And STEM is, I think, a reaction to that and attempting to recapture, indeed, an older view of science, sort of as you might say, natural history, natural philosophy, where you're bringing all these disciplines together. Indeed, some people talk about STEAM. They add the A in for arts. You know,
STEAM?
Yes. Right.
You heard it here on ThinkTech.
So
STEAM.
Or there's STEMs with an S on the end for social sciences.
Okay.
So there's lots of acronyms now. But the point that I want to sort of push a little bit on is that...
You don't want to talk about music.
Well, we could, but actually I do want to get some musicians on here sometime, but, and go into that. But science becomes really meaningful to people only if it sort of applies to their lives. And in many cases, that's one of the problems I think that students have with science is they don't see its connection to their life. They go in, they sit there in a science classroom, they're given a whole bunch of, you know, names of plants to memorize or the divisions of the animal kingdom or what have you. And it seems all sort of artificial and vocabulary laden and really sort of awful. But it doesn't have to be that way. So I have a project, I've mentioned it before to you, called Water for Life. This is a National Science Foundation grant that I run through Pacific Resources for Education and Learning, PREL, for whom I work. And this has me engaging communities in 4 of the so-called U.S.-affiliated Pacific Islands, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, Republic of Palau, and 2 states within the Federated States of Micronesia, Chuk and Yap, in informal community-based science around water, and particularly around drinking water. So all of these sites have real water issues. In none of them really can you do what you do here and just assume that anytime you see a tap, you can turn it on and you'll have fresh, perfectly potable water, perfectly good drinking water. Some of them do have systems in their bigger urban areas. Sometimes those aren't so good. The water is just not really trustworthy. Others have more trustworthy water, but people don't use it for various reasons. Lots of the more remote areas, there are no such systems. People have to either catch rainwater off the roofs, or get rainwater out of streams or groundwater springs. And my project is working to help engage community members in improving their access to better quality water, learning about water, and using that as a sort of hook to get into the learning about water and seeing the science is all meaningful to them. So I had a few pictures. I don't know if Zuri can cue up the one as number 1. This will show so this is what a so-called first flush diverter system. This is on Majuro, and what you see there is part of a rainwater catchment system. So the roof of this school is a nice, fairly new metal roof, and it's catching water in the gutters that run along the front of that building. And that water runs down into that white drain pipe that you see. But the issue that you face with this kind of system is roofs are not inherently clean, right? They sit out there, birds fly over them and poop on them.
And even if you clean them, they're not going to stay clean.
Right, leaves blow on them, dust settles on them, rats can run across them. Now, if you want to collect your water off your roof, that's sort of a problem, right? Because when that first rain hits, what does it do? Water is a very good solvent, right? And it picks all that crud up and washes it all off very quickly, right? So you really want to sort of throw away the first bit of water that comes off your roof. And that's what that first flush diverter will do. You can see that it comes down, and there's a sort of a down pipe. There's that lower sort of dead end section of pipe, the white pipe there that has a couple turns in it. That collects water, basically. Water runs in there. The first water just flows straight down into that, gradually fills up that dead end pipe, which has a little ball valve in it. When it's filled up that whole pipe up to the 3-way joint, the ball valve then is floating up to the top and seals that off, and only then can the water start flowing along that upper horizontal pipe and into the...
Brilliant. Who invented that?
Well, they've been around for a while. No, I didn't invent that at all. No, I can't take it.
I'm still impressed.
But notice what it is. So there's technology, albeit of a fairly simple kind. There's engineering, there's science, there's mathematics. For all these things, you have to know how big a roof to put in, how big a tank to put in, how to calculate how much water you need per person per day to build your resilience. So this is a very, you can see this project is meaningful to these people. Majuro has very limited supplies of groundwater. It's a very flat atoll island with very little groundwater, really.
How much rainwater?
That's what they drink there, is rainwater. I mean, Majuro is one of those places where it becomes very clear that all the water you drink ultimately comes from rain, and sort of no matter where. It may be rain that fell, in our cases here in Hawaii, 10,000 years ago, but it's all rainwater, basically. And in Majuro, they catch a lot of it just that way. Recently in Majuro, they set up to say that all the schools actually have to provide clean drinking water for their students, which it was not a requirement of the schools before. Now, for accreditation purposes, they actually have to do that. So all the schools are sort of scrambling to put these catchment systems in place so they can catch and provide good quality clean water. And we're helping them by, for instance, helping install these first flush diverter systems, helping them put in new tanks, or in some cases repair their old tanks, clean them out. Some of these places have been catching rainwater for years, but have never cleaned out their tanks. And if you have a water tank that sits there for years and years.
Got schmutz in it.
Yes, exactly. Several years ago, a group went around, the land grant people from the College of the Marshall Islands, and surveyed all the water systems they could find on Majuro, and found that about 3/4 of them had unacceptable levels of coliform bacteria in them to make them unfit to drink.
From the schmutz.
Yeah, from everything. So again, we're trying to get people involved in this kind of work. where teams of community members come together, they put in these first flush diverters, they clean off roofs, they set up new guttering systems, they put in new rainwater tanks, and they thus, in this way, help sort of build a better access to clean water.
Does the program Water for Life fund those upgrades?
Yes, we typically do that in conjunction and collaboration with other partners. We have only fairly limited funds, but we can go out and buy, for instance, the piping and the first flush diverters. Those only cost $30 or $40 for the basic diverter. And, we could buy some more of that 4-inch PVC pipe.
That would be available in the Costco there in Majuro?
Well, it's available in the Ace Hardware in Majuro.
No? Is there a hardware store?
There is an Ace Hardware. Hey, Majuro's a pretty big place. It's got 30 to 40,000 people living in Majuro, so it's really the big hot spot in the Marshall Islands, and has that kind of amenities. Other places, yes, it's a real problem. If we want to do this same kind of work, for instance, on one of the outer atolls of Yap, we're going to have to bring everything there. We're going to have to, everything from the cement to hold the PVC pipes together, to all the fittings, every piece of piping, because yes, they have no sources of this locally available. But this.
Can I just ask you about the technique?
Sure.
Why not just have a big catchment tank?
Say a little more. I mean, yes, you could do a large shallow tank like that.
Yeah, which catches the water and which you don't have to worry about, dissolving schmutz.
Well, if it's a large open tank, birds are going to be flying over it, pooping into it.
So you still have the schmutz.
Animals will crawl into it to drink and, slide in and drown themselves, and leaves will blow into it. And,
Next question, filter. Can't you filter all the schmutz out?
Indeed, that's one of the things you also do. You try to get and you couldn't see it in that picture, but typically before that first flush diverter, at the end of the guttering, we put in a screen filter. So the bigger pieces of grit and leaves and things never even get in there.
So it's a combination of first flush and the screen.
Right. They're always basically trying to keep as much crud out of your actual catchment tank, so the catchment water stays as clean as possible.
Is it clean? I mean, let's assume they fixed the coliform bacteria. Let's assume that the thing works right with the first flush device. Let's assume the screen takes out the big stuff. At the end of the day, would you and I drink that water? Is it clean? Is it safe? Does it work?
It certainly can be, yes. If you've set up a system properly, where your roof is reasonably far away from trees, so it's not getting a lot of leaves on it, you have a good first flush diverter in place, a screen filter, then what you end up drinking is fairly pure rainwater, which is indeed very clean water in most cases.
I don't know if I ever told you about Safe Water Systems. Safe Water Systems is I think it's a nonprofit, and it's headquartered here in Hawaii.
Okay.
Run by a guy, this is for a long time, it must be 20 years old, by a guy named Will Hartzell.
Okay. I've talked to him.
And it's a patented design of a valve, which was designed by a plumber. The whole thing is designed by a plumber. And what happens is you take water that's not so pure, that may have bacteria in it, and you run it through this thing, and it acts like a conventional solar water heater on your roof. And it runs through and it gets heated up by the solar process of this device. It comes out the other side and it's clean.
Right.
And Will Hartzell and Safe Water Systems deliver these at a relatively small price to underdeveloped countries all over the world. It doesn't require any power. See, that's the thing. And it lasts a long, long time. And so they can get clean drinking water, even from dirty river water, using this device. As I recall, it may even boil the water out of the original source water, using the heat that it gets off the solar.
Right. There are a number of systems around it. And it's funny because I did talk to him some years ago, or to one of his associates, and I may need to go back and look at that again. It's a good reminder. But yes, if you simply take a bottle of water and set it in the sun for some while, particularly in the tropics where it heats up quite nicely, it does not even have to boil. If it gets to a certain temperature that it can easily do in the sunlight and sits there for half an hour or so, you've effectively killed off 99% of the bacteria in it anyhow. It's called solar pasteurization. And again, it's a perfectly good technique for people to use, and we're in Water for Life, we try to promote people using that technique too.
I don't think it'd be useful where you don't have running water down below or on the ground the way, Majuro doesn't have that. And you only have it coming down in rainfall. This isn't necessarily going to be much help.
Well, yeah, the pasteurization, as I was talking about, is for very small quantities of water for a day's drinking water or whatever. We are going to talk some more about this when we come back, but right now we're going to go to a break. I'm Ethan Allen, your host on Likeable Science. Talking with me today is Jay Fidell of ThinkTech Hawaii. We'll be right back.
Hi, my name is Andrew Howard. I'm an astronomer at the Institute for Astronomy at the University of Hawaii up in Manoa. I'd like to tell you about the annual open house that we're having. This year it is on April 6th, 11 to 4 p.m. It's an all ages event, kids, grown-ups, even people in between, everyone is welcome. We have a lot of really fun activities. You get to meet astronomers, look at yourself in an infrared camera, play with Legos, make robots, look at videos. You can even some of the kids like to make comets out of gravel and snow. Even adults like to do that too. You'll be able to look at the sun with a solar camera safely. It's really a great activity. We do this every year in April, and I hope to see you this year. Thanks.
And you're back here on Likeable Science. I'm your host, Ethan Allen. With me today in the ThinkTech studios is ThinkTech's own Jay Fidell. And we're talking about sort of authentic STEM, the really real-world STEM learning, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics learning. And we've been discussing a little bit this Water for Life project that I run through Pacific Resources for Education and Learning. I was talking before about the first flush diverters, and I think our second photo here shows another one of those systems that we have. This one's actually in YAP, and in this case, it's a black pipe is essentially catching the water. You can see that once you pan back to see the bottom of it. You'll see that's the sort of the initial catchment of the water. So the water runs off that roof through the white pipe. First, it flows in until it fills up that black pipe, and then again, a ball valve, once it's all the way full, stops at the top, and then only then can the water run into the tank. And of course, then after your rainstorm is over, you open up the bottom of that black pipe and drain all the dirty water out of there, and you throw that away because that's fairly filthy water. But again, it's a slightly different design. Again, these things are not rocket science, are simple engineering and technology, a simple T connector for PVC pipe, a ball valve that floats up in the one piece of it.
Yeah, can I just add two more possibilities?
Sure.
Neither of which would be all that effective in Majuro, but since we're talking about the technology, one would be, of course, desalination, which I think Hawaii is going to have to do after a while.
Absolutely.
And that's, if you want to go to school and study something that's going to get to be very valuable technology, that's it. Because right now, to provide drinking water for Hawaii in lieu of, the aquifer would cost billions. Just Oahu, billions. And one day we may have to do that.
Absolutely.
That's one of my unfunded liabilities for our program next week.
There we go. All right.
Okay, so that's one, and the technology is just to boil off, the water and then recollect it
And indeed,
as distilled water.
one of my early guests on Likeable Science, Riley McGivern, came and talked about a solar-powered desalination system
Right.
that they had developed. It's all modularized and sort of fits in a standard shipping container.
Yeah.
And can go out and produce, I think he said, 2,000 gallons per day of fresh water from ocean water, all off of solar power.
Yeah, that's great. So,
Yeah.
because otherwise you have a huge electric bill.
Right, right.
The other one, which is related, is desiccation. If you go out to Whole Foods in Kailua, you will notice that the air in Whole Foods store, the big store, is really cold. And this helps them with their refrigeration bill. Because they have, very effective air conditioning. Why is that? Because they have desiccation units on the roof. And what a desiccation unit is, it looks a little like a classical solar water heater affair. But what it does is it heats the water in pipes, and it runs the water through a desiccation machine. And then what happens is it boils the water out of the air, so you get desiccated air. Okay? And so now you have air that is very cheap to cool off because it's expensive to cool humidified air.
Right.
Dehumidified air, it's like a third of the price
Right.
to cool it. Okay, so now you have air conditioning at a very cheap rate, plus you have all the water that it took out of the air. Okay, that's the double benefit of desiccation. I suggest that could be useful anywhere.
That's very interesting. I hadn't realized they did that, but it makes perfect sense because, of course, water has tremendous heat capacity, stores tremendous amounts of heat, unless it's very expensive to remove heat from. So if you remove the water from the air itself has a much, much lower heat capacity, and it's much easier to heat and cool. So it's very interesting.
This goes for the proposition that, technology is going to come up with better things all the time at hopefully a cheaper price, and that we'll be able to handle some of these larger, enterprise level problems, environmental problems using new technology.
Exactly. Now, I think because I do my work out in these remote locales where they don't have very much technical support, I tend to think of very simple solutions, such as a very classic evaporation condensation process, which, in your desiccation unit, that must be doing the same kind of thing. But again, that's a great way to get very clean, fresh water out from salt water. So if you take and stick a pan of salt water in a box with a slanted plexiglass or glass lid, the water will evaporate out of the salt water, will condense on your glass, will run down, you can then collect that, and you have perfectly good fresh water, no matter how dirty the water you started with is. And again, this kind of very simple, very rugged, has no moving parts, requires nothing fancy to it. That's got to be more and more widely employed particularly for small communities and isolated individuals in these remote locales, because they're not going to have big fancy powered systems, right?
We haven't unlocked all the secrets here either. I mean, for example, not half a mile away where we are sitting is at least the planned unit for Honolulu seawater air conditioning.
Right, exactly.
Which makes use of the process of OTEC, ocean thermal energy conversion, and brings up the cool water from the depths, and then does an exchange from seawater into fresh water, and ostensibly feeds all the air conditioning facilities in the downtown area.
Right.
And they talk about doing this in Waikiki also. But I guess what it establishes for me anyway, and as a scientist, I'd like your opinion about it. There's a relationship here between energy and water. The two are like bonded somehow for us.
They are. That's very true. And it takes typically energy to get water from wherever it is, and to move water around. We need that energy. Yeah. Actually, the National Science Foundation these days has just recently put out a call for proposals on food, energy, and water as a sort of a vital triumvirate for people's lives, for sort of energy or environmental sustainability. We really need to think about those three as being intimately linked.
Yeah, sure.
And so, yeah.
Because you need the water for the crops.
Right.
So, okay, all of this goes to the need for STEM.
Right.
It's like they used to say, all politics is local. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess you could also say all STEM is local.
Exactly. That's what we sort of talk about. We call it place-based learning, and I think maybe the next slide will help illustrate some of this. Why that is, people have to understand. So here again, these are rainwater catchment systems. These things are called bob bags. There's two of them sitting on the back of this structure. They are actually they're sort of a short-term temporary solution. They're more or less a tarpaulin material with a rubber or plastic liner in them. And again, they're hooked up. You can see the guttering coming in underneath the overhang there and then feeding down into the bob bags. And then the little white spigot out the front of the bob bag. Each one of those can hold about 350 gallons of water. And they won't last forever. They're sort of a soft-sided thing. They're gonna bleach out if somebody comes along and pokes a sharp stick through them. They're gonna be leaking. But in the short term, it can be great. You can set one of these up in a matter of a couple hours, and instantly you have another, you know, another nice, good water source. So
It's part of the it's a catchment.
right,
type of
right,
tank.
right. It's a temporary catchment
But you have
tank.
to clean it out because it's gonna get the chloroform bacteria also, isn't it?
It would, again, you could and should put a first flush diverter. That particular installation didn't yet have its first flush diverter run in, but yeah, you do that, and the screening, just as we talked about, all these systems should really have the same kinds of protections on them to really maximize water quality.
But now you're talking about STEM education in a sort of continuum to developing this kind of solution in underdeveloped countries.
Right.
But those solutions weren't developed in Majuro. They were developed on the mainland or here, right?
Well, actually, the Bob bags, I don't know who came up with that idea, but they've actually were sort of developed, prototyped, and tested in Uganda.
Oh, really?
And although I talked to a guy in Washington, D.C. to get mine, and then he directed me to somebody who, in Majuro, he has a dealer there who deals with them. So, and those are becoming quite popular now. We're going to probably put a number more of them out. We bought about 30 or 40 of those.
What you're talking about, all these things we've been talking about, it's a laboratory of the underdeveloped countries, where these technologies would not be all that useful or in demand in a modern civilized Western city.
True.
But in an underdeveloped country which doesn't have a water system, this could save lives.
Oh, it does,
this could make life possible when it might not otherwise be.
Exactly, and if/when our infrastructure breaks down, it's very good to know about these things. It's good to know how you can set them up. It's good to have the materials on hand to set them up quickly.
Oh, that would never happen here. The water supply has assured us it would never happen here.
Yes, just when was it? Last year in Portland, Oregon, they suddenly had some big glitch in their water supply system, and suddenly across the whole city of Portland, they said, you can't drink your water, and that lasted for 2 or 3 days, and of course all the bottled water disappeared from the shelves of all the stores, in a matter of hours, and there was, it's a good thing it didn't last any longer. The city of Koror in Palau, the capital, they get all their water from the next island over, which has a big natural rainwater catchment system, and then they pipe it to Koror, which is a city of probably 14,000, 15,000 people, and their big water main broke last year, and so suddenly the whole city was left with very limited supplies of water. And again, some of the work we've done was helpful to, because it gave people these backup sources. The next picture here will show, okay, well, this is another Bob bag picture, just a different view of the same Bob bags setup. But these are, as you can see, good useful things. This is a rather different sort of project. What there were here was 2 springs. So the one in the foreground is undeveloped, unimproved. That is, it's just a hole in the ground where water seeps up and then it will dribble away. There was one behind that where we now have that more elaborate structure. And what we did was we provided the materials to the local community there, who built a concrete block base around there. They lined the whole thing with stone and cement. They built this up. They put 1-inch security mesh around it, put a roof on top of it. And although it's not yet quite done, there's going to be piping running off to a shoreline, nearby shoreline, where anyone coming by in a boat can get it. It closes and locks so that it can stay secure. People can't get into it and throw stuff into it or use it randomly for washing clothes or anything. If they want to do that, they can use this other spring. But this way, what they will have is this nice, protected, clean spring water. And that spring is not going to have bird droppings in it. It's not going to have leaves in it. It's not going to be collecting organic debris. It's going to be relatively pure, clean spring water that will stay, that will be basically clean when it comes out, come out of the tap on the shore clean. So it's another way. It's a rather different way. Rather than collecting water from the roofs, this is water that's actually collected uphill from that and it's just popping up in a spring. The next picture will show, I think, a site, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, this is in Palau. There's a spring just upstream of this, rather large. You can see this is a big concrete tank. And you can see the volume of water pouring out of that spout out of it. Again, they just sort of closed off this section of this little stream, basically, and built a good-sized tank. And the community there uses for all their water needs, from drinking to bathing to all this kind of stuff. recently we helped get them organized. They drained the whole thing, went in and scooped out all the silt and mud that had accumulated in the bottom, cleaned it all out. We're talking with them now about possibly using, you can see the one post in the foreground here, but there are 4 posts around that, using those to put a roof over it, and again, some of that security screening to, again, make that water stay a little cleaner, possibly use a sedimentation trap in it. So lots of different ways that using very simple, straightforward science, technology, engineering, and math can help people get better access to more water, to better quality water, engage them in learning about water and what it's all about, engagement learning fundamental science.
Yeah, for a fundamental problem. I mean, and this problem is going to get worse, not better, all over the world. And as you suggested, someday we may need this kind of technology right here in a civilized city.
Exactly, or you may find yourself sometime stranded on a desert island, and it'd be useful to know how to do it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this goes to, I know you want to take a break, but this goes to, a very large issue, and that is when we get to the point of scarcity for water and other things in the environment, the planet will not be able to support as many people as it supports now. And so we really have to have this technology up our sleeve.
We do, and we'll talk about that when we get back here. I'm your host, Ethan Allen. You're with us on Likeable Science. Jay Fidell and I are talking about STEM as it applies to water, and we'll be right back.
Aloha, Yappers. This is your host, Kingsley, for the Yap Show. Every Friday, 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. You can catch us here live, ThinkTech Hawaii, and then later on we upload to our YouTube channel. We talk about youth issues, policies, youth programs, and how to transition yourself into adulthood.
But this was like a sign, I guess. Hey, Mike's like, hey, right. Now's your chance to go back to school, which I'm doing.
Catch us here again live, 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. Hawaii Standard Time. Aloha.
Aloha, I'm Hunter Hevlin, host of Sustainable Hawaii here at ThinkTech Hawaii. You can tune in every week on Thursday at 2 p.m. to see interviews with sustainability professionals from around the state and even further abroad, learning about activities with water management, food security, waste management, and a whole host of other fascinating opportunities to get engaged with making a greener island. So if you're interested in making the transition from consuming individuals to communities of producers, check us out every Thursday.
And you're back on Likeable Science. I'm your host, Ethan Allen. With me today in the ThinkTech studios is ThinkTech's own Jay Fidell. We're talking about authentic science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, real-world STEM, and how people engage in learning it. I've been sharing a few stories and pictures of my recent trip to some remote islands in the Pacific here, Palau, Chuk and Yap states in Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands, and showing a few of our community-based learning projects, all dealing with ways of helping people obtain better water, more drinkable water, and
Survive.
And survive and improve the qualities of their lives. And Jay brought up the fact that, well, I'm dealing with these small islands. This is really a big problem everywhere, and it really is. It's increasingly the case. We are in the mainland U.S. draining our huge main aquifer under the whole western section of the U.S. In places we're draining it at a frightening rate. There are parts of the Salinas Valley, which is the breadbasket of the country.
That was on 60 Minutes, I think, not too long ago.
Dropping,
it was very scary.
The ground level is dropping at 1 foot per year. In
Because
parts of
there's a vacuum down
People are
there.
just sucking water out of it so fast. Yeah.
And the water level itself is going down, and they're using all that water in a way to damage the system.
Well, they're using it to grow crops, but it's going to, and it ultimately is filtering back into the system, but it's going to take it thousands of years to get back there.
They're ahead of the game.
Yeah,
they're ahead of the natural process.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not sustainable. I mean, ultimately, I would hope people will figure out things to do. For instance, the classic idea of breaking off taking an iceberg and basically surrounding the underwater part of it with a big giant plastic bag, and then setting that off of LA, and then essentially piping the fresh water as it melts.
If we can find an iceberg, it may not. There was a thing on NPR this morning on Science Friday about indications of climate change, the winners and the losers, and they had a bunch of telephone calls come in from Alaska for the proposition that the polar bears are dying.
Right.
that the icebergs or the ice offshore is now receded from being right out there, you know, a few yards away to hundreds of miles away.
Right.
There's no ice anymore.
Right, no, the Northwest Passage has opened up now a couple
It
summers
used
in a
to
row,
take
right.
27 months for a ship, say, 20 or 30 years ago, to get through the Northwest Passage. Now it takes 2 months, the same class of ship. So we're talking about a complete lack of ice. So if you want to put an iceberg off LA, you're going to have trouble finding one.
Well, that would come from Antarctica, not the
Oh,
Arctic.
thank you for that.
Because you heard, of course, a few months ago about one of the big ice shelves there
Fell
has
down.
broken loose and is now sliding more rapidly. And so there's going to be lots of calving of icebergs.
We're in trouble. It's a good thing we're not younger. The younger people, they have the problem.
Well,
Smile.
It is true. I mean, for nowhere more so than in places like Majuro, where you've got these small, low-lying islands that have had cultures on them for thousands of years that are literally, you know, the kids growing up there today are not going to raise their kids on those islands. Those islands won't be habitable by the
I
time those
think
people
you've
grow up.
touched on something, though, Ethan, and that is, you know, why is it important to study STEM? I mean, a lot of talk about STEM, you know, in every school and every curriculum, STEM has come alive as a subject, educational issue to be discussed. But there's another reason, different than, you know, just becoming an engineer and building systems like you're talking about. It's appreciating those systems and realizing there is a real need for those systems, and realizing, you know, for example, that climate change is serious and the solutions to climate change are serious. And I think it's that level of awareness that is just as important as the technical knowledge they get when they study STEM.
Absolutely. You have to get your communities aware of the issues, aware of the problems, aware of the challenges, to engage them in thinking about the solutions, in finding the mitigating approaches and technologies, and really then building and implementing those kinds of solutions, which are all fundamentally STEM issues. So yeah, it's central to the survival of these places.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. With STEM, assuming we have some STEM going on here, I mean, with all the talk, you'd think we'd never understood the word before, like music. But with all the STEM that we have, do you think that people in Oahu fully understand the aquifer and the lens and the damage, such as in the agricultural areas of California, to realize that we are on a very short leash, and that soon enough we're going to have a big problem, and that we'd better be ready to spend the money, find the engineering to handle. Do you think people realize that?
The short answer is no, but let me expand a bit on that. People in this country are somewhat frighteningly STEM or science illiterate. They really do not understand, and it's the fault really of the scientists who have not articulated their challenges clearly enough. They don't understand the scope and nature of the problem. Yes, here on Oahu, we are sucking water out of our aquifer much faster than it's being replaced. The aquifer is going down. There are springs that have dried up that were being fed off of obviously a much, when the water level was higher in the aquifer, now it's dropped below where those springs are being fed and they no longer run. You can't keep doing this indefinitely. I mean, I was just saying about the Salinas Valley, or the sucking out water. We're doing the same thing on a smaller scale here in Oahu. Very few people appreciate it. Yes, the Board of Water will probably tell you we have water for, you know, the foreseeable future, which we may for.
Depends on how far foreseeable it is.
10 years, 100 years,
It's
1,000 years.
It's one political cycle.
Right.
until retirement, you know what I mean?
Yeah. But people don't typically understand that as well as they should, and they don't appreciate that. And if they did, we'd be much more actively involved in water conservation activities. We'd really be rethinking our whole system. Why is it, for instance, we take water, we get good fresh water, we chlorinate it, we purify it, we filter it, and then we dump it into our toilets and flush it away? I mean, it's hugely
Terrible
water
waste,
intensive,
terrible.
energy intensive.
And when we get short on water,
Yeah,
that's
we're
going to be
we're gonna have to
a
switch.
huge waste of money too.
Right. So some of these islands are looking at setting up sort of parallel systems where they may actually use seawater for their wastewater systems, and because it will just save a lot of water, they won't be using that water for those secondary uses at all. You know, I think we have to be thinking more innovatively, more creatively about that. The whole you know, low water flow or no water flow toilets, I think are just going to have to become part of everyone's you know, way of life in the
Just
future.
like energy, you know, you want to get clean energy, you want to get hopefully cheap energy, but you also don't want to waste energy. It's the same thing with water.
Right.
You don't want to waste it.
Exactly. I mean, there is lots of water around. That is, since 97% of the water on Earth is salt water, right, in the oceans, and of that remaining 3%, essentially 90+% of that is not available to us because it's either deep underground or locked up in glaciers. And so it's just this tiny, tiny fraction of a percent of the water on Earth that is liquid fresh water on the surface. And that's not going to last forever, and that's going to be too easily polluted. But
I want to talk about Lake Baikal for
Okay,
a moment.
sure.
May we?
Yes,
In the
absolutely.
remaining few minutes
Sure.
we have.
Yeah.
So
Fascinating place, like
we,
Baikal.
we did a show back a few years ago about Siberia. And, you know, all of the numbered cities in Siberia where they study physics and used to make bombs there. And, all.
Right.
And the trek across Siberia to Asia. And on the trek, I guess it's must be on or close to the Silk Road, is this enormous lake called Lake Baikal.
That at one point held 1/5 of all the fresh surface water on Earth.
Really?
That one
I
lake.
knew it was huge. It is
Yeah,
huge.
it's very
and
deep.
it's fresh water, and
Right.
it was clear, crystal clear as a bell.
Right.
And it was right there, and there was really nothing around the lake that would have polluted the lake or anything like that. It was a real treat to be there to see it.
They had their own endemic freshwater seals. The only place on Earth that had freshwater seals.
Wow, I didn't know.
Yeah.
Oh. You know, that's the thing about scientists. They know a lot of stuff that nobody else knows. Anyway, so the last I read about Lake Baikal is it has fallen prey to pollution, to industry around it, to communities that grow up around it that are polluting the place.
Yes.
This is the largest freshwater source on the planet,
Right.
and we are polluting that yet too.
Yeah, it has more water in Lake Baikal than in all the Great Lakes combined. And yeah, and they're managing now to pollute that. I mean, we said, you know, people for years sort of thought you could dump stuff in the ocean because it's just so big that nothing we ever put in there is ever going to make any difference because it's just, you know, too vast. But it turns out to be untrue. You know, we now have things like the Great Pacific Garbage Gyre, where there's tremendous amounts of our plastic trash
In the lee of the
accumulating.
turn of the continent there between Alaska and the Pacific Northwest.
Right. And worldwide now, there are microplastics are littering the ocean floor.
Forever.
Well, for a long, long time, yes, and in remarkable quantities, in 10,000 times the concentration that they exist in, like the gyre there.
Did you ever see those, the seabird exhibits? I forget which airport it is in the West Coast. There's an airport in the West Coast with an exhibit about the seabirds. And the seabirds have been, they died, have
Right.
been dissected and opened up, and their bellies are loaded
Yes.
with multicolored plastics of all kinds and
Right.
shapes,
Little
which killed them.
Right, little albatross chicks eat little, yes, fishing lures and little beads of various sorts. And yes, their whole crops fill up with plastic crud instead of with the stones that will grind their food up properly. So
Yes, and these
Yeah.
birds are very far away from land.
yes.
So, I mean, it's tragic on so many different levels.
yes.
But the most tragic part of it, I'd like your opinion on this in our remaining 2 minutes, is that it's permanent. That, you know, we're not going to be, unless with Herculean effort, we're not going to be able to fix this. When the lens is damaged in Oahu, it doesn't come back. You can't go down there and fix it. You have to find another way to get the water.
Right.
When the oceans are polluted, or Lake Baikal is polluted, or the Great Lakes are polluted, you can't fix that.
Right.
And so we have to learn to live with less water, less fresh, clear water than we've had before. We'd better bloody well know the technology, because it won't be easy.
Exactly. No, that's very well put. And we need to be learning that now so we can appreciate what we have, learn to value it, preserve what we can of it, try to minimize our continued pollution of the rest of it. But also, yes, figure out the new ways to get water. I mean, water is always around. It's in the air. We can pull it out of the air if we need to. But it's going to become more and more expensive, more and more difficult to get clean water, and we need to be all the time very aware of looking on better ways to use science, technology, engineering, and mathematics to help us in this quest. And we need kids to be learning this stuff because they're going to be the ones who are going to need to be applying it.
From your lips to God's ears, Ethan.
Okay, I hear from our producer that we have something about the top 10 items collected from the ocean. Here we go. Okay, look at this. Cigarette butts. There we go. There's something that you really want to know is in your top 10 list. Yes, grocery bags. Oh, lovely, lovely. Yeah, look at all this stuff that people just hurl away, throw away the plastic bottles, the bags, garbage bags, all this kind of stuff that is trashing our world's biggest water supply, you know?
But you know, just to be realistic about it, I don't go down. Nobody I know goes down to the ocean side and the beach and throws plastic buttons in there. It has to come from some kind of system that we have where our trash somebody is dumping our trash in the ocean. Some government organization is doing that.
Well, that's a good topic for a future show and a future conversation, Jay, and I look forward to having that with you. But yes, anyhow, we have been talking today about sort of real STEM, learning authentic STEM. Jay Fidell, ThinkTech's own CEO, and me, Ethan Allen, your host here on Likeable Science, have been hopefully inspiring people to take better care of their water and learn some science, technology, engineering, and math at the same time. I hope you'll join us next week for Likeable Science. Thank you very much for being here, Jay.
Thank you, Ethan.
Aloha.
Aloha.